There's an entire industry built around helping you feel better. Crystals, affirmations, meditation apps, rituals, each one promising a shift, a breakthrough, a new version of you. And when none of it works, the conclusion is often the same. Try harder. Think more positively. Find a better method. But here's the uncomfortable truth that rarely gets said. Many of the people selling these solutions are just as stuck as the people buying them. And the reason so many individuals, especially those genuinely committed to growth, never truly transform isn't because they're choosing the wrong tools. It's because they are avoiding the one thing that actually creates real change. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He didn't study the appearance of transformation or the temporary feeling of it. He studied what actually shifts a human being at their core, and what he found was simple, yet profoundly difficult to accept. Growth does not come from adding more. It comes from removing what is keeping you small. So in this journey, we're not talking about surface-level habits. We're talking about deep psychological structures, patterns so embedded that most people mistake them for their identity. And Jung was clear about this. You don't manage these patterns. You don't soften them. You let them go completely, because you cannot carry what weighs you down and expect to rise. The first pattern is the need to be seen as a good person. Take a moment and reflect on how much energy you spend shaping how others perceive you. You hold back your honest thoughts to avoid sounding harsh. You agree to things you don't want because saying no feels uncomfortable. You smile through situations that feel wrong just to avoid being labeled difficult. And somewhere along the way, you tell yourself this is kindness, that this is goodness. But Jung had a different word for it. He called it the persona. The persona is the mask you wear, the version of yourself carefully designed to gain approval, avoid rejection, and maintain harmony. It's the self that performs rather than expresses. And here's the truth that can be hard to face. The persona is not who you are. It is a strategy, a performance. And performing goodness is one of the most exhausting ways to live, because it is not driven by authenticity. It is driven by fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being misunderstood, fear that if you stop performing, people will no longer accept you. That quiet, constant fear keeps you in a state of survival. Not growth, not freedom, survival. Jung observed something powerful in people who had truly transformed. They stopped trying to appear good and started being real. And being real didn't mean becoming cold or careless. It meant becoming whole. They could be kind, but also firm. Compassionate, but also honest. Generous, but with clear boundaries. They were no longer controlled by guilt or shame, because they were no longer performing for approval. And this is where it becomes difficult. For many people, being good wasn't just a personality trait. It was a survival mechanism. Maybe it kept peace in a chaotic home. Maybe it was how love was earned. Maybe it was how you made yourself small enough to feel safe. So when you begin to release this pattern, it doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels like losing yourself. Because in a way, you are. The version of you built around pleasing others begins to dissolve. And in that space, something more honest begins to emerge, but only if you're willing to stay there. Jung suggested that you know you've truly released this need when you can disappoint someone and remain steady. Not proud, not defensive, just grounded. You no longer feel the urge to chase approval or over-explain yourself. You simply stand in who you are. And that quiet stability, that inner grounding, is what real growth feels like. Not performance. Presence. The second pattern Jung warned about is far more subtle, and for many people, far more difficult to recognize. It's the compulsion to fix, save, or heal everyone around you. If you see yourself as empathetic, sensitive, someone who naturally takes care of others, this may feel like a strength. And in many ways, it is. But Jung noticed something important when he studied what he called the wounded healer archetype. These are people who feel most alive when they are needed. People who organize their relationships, their time, even their identity around helping others. On the surface, it looks like compassion. But beneath that surface, something deeper is often at play. Because when your sense of worth is built on being needed, you will unconsciously seek out people who need you. When your identity is tied to being the one who holds everything together, you will surround yourself with those who are falling apart. And here's the part that's hardest to admit. When those people begin to heal, when they become more independent, more stable, you may feel a subtle discomfort, a quiet loss, and sometimes without even realizing it, you may pull away or find new reasons they still need you. Because if they don't need you anymore, who are you? This is where Jung draws a clear line. This is not pure compassion. This is attachment. It is codependency wearing the mask of care. And it operates from a place of lack. I am only valuable if I am needed. My life only matters if I am fixing something. I cannot sit with my own pain, so I stay busy managing someone else's. So the helping never stops. And neither does the inner emptiness it's trying to cover. Jung observed that those who had truly matured psychologically developed a different relationship with helping. They could offer support when it was appropriate, but they did not feel compelled to rescue. They could sit with someone's struggle without immediately trying to solve it. They trusted that struggle had meaning, that not every pain needed to be removed, that growth often comes from facing difficulty, not escaping it. And this shift changes everything, because now your care comes from fullness, not from need. You help because you choose to, not because your identity depends on it. But letting go of this role is painful, because if you are no longer the one everyone relies on, you are forced to face a deeper question. Who am I without being needed? And for many people, that question feels like standing in empty space. Jung would say you've begun to release this pattern when you can listen to someone's problem without immediately offering solutions. When you can say, "That sounds really hard," and mean it, without turning it into your responsibility. That is care without control, and it is far more powerful than rescuing ever was. The third pattern is even more internal and often invisible until you really begin to observe yourself. It is the attachment to being understood. Think about how many times you've tried to explain yourself to someone. You share your thoughts, your feelings, your reasons. They don't quite get it. So you try again. You rephrase. You add more detail. You search for the perfect words that will finally make them see. And when they still don't understand, something inside you sinks. You feel unseen, invalidated, alone in your own experience. Jung saw this as one of the most subtle traps of the psyche. Because needing to be understood is not really about communication, it's about validation. If you require others to understand you in order to feel real, then your sense of self is no longer rooted within you. It is outsourced. Your inner world becomes dependent on someone else's ability to comprehend it. And that is an unstable foundation. Because the truth is, no one can fully understand you. Not completely. Not perfectly. They haven't lived your life. They haven't felt what you've felt in the exact way you've felt it. And if your sense of reality depends on that level of understanding, you will always feel slightly disconnected. Always waiting. Always explaining. Always trying again. Jung noticed that people who had reached a deeper level of consciousness approached this differently. They shared when it felt right. They expressed themselves when the moment allowed. But they did not need to be understood in order to feel grounded. They knew what they knew. They felt what they felt, and that was enough. This is not arrogance. It's not isolation. It is self-trust. And building that kind of trust requires something many people were never taught. To stand by your own experience even when no one else confirms it. Especially if you grew up in an environment where your feelings were dismissed or minimized. This can feel unnatural, even threatening. But Jung was clear this step is necessary. Because when you stop chasing understanding, something interesting happens. Some relationships begin to fade. People who were used to you explaining, justifying, oversharing, they may feel uncomfortable with your silence. They may call you distant, cold, changed. But what's really happening is this. You are no longer asking for permission to exist as you are. And that creates space for a different kind of connection, one where you are accepted, not explained. You'll know you've released this pattern when someone misunderstands you, and you don't feel the need to correct them. Maybe you feel a little sadness, but not instability, not urgency, not the need to chase clarity. You simply remain grounded in your own knowing, and that quiet certainty is a higher form of strength. The fourth pattern Jung spoke about cuts even deeper because it lives inside the way we relate to the people closest to us. It is the attachment to who someone could become. Most people have someone in their life like this: a partner, a parent, a friend, someone who again and again disappoints you, hurts you, or simply fails to meet you where you are. And yet you stay, or you keep trying, or you leave the door slightly open. Not because of who they are, but because of who you believe they could be. You see their potential. You imagine the version of them that has done the work, healed their wounds, changed their patterns. The version that finally shows up the way you've always needed them to. And so, without realizing it, you begin relating to that imagined version, instead of the real person standing in front of you. Jung called this projection, and he was very clear. Projection is one of the strongest forces keeping people trapped in painful repeating cycles. Because when you relate to someone's potential rather than their reality, you are not actually seeing them. You are seeing your own story. A story you need to believe, a version of them that must exist. Because accepting who they really are would require you to make a decision you're not ready to make. Maybe you need them to change so you can finally feel safe. Maybe you need them to become better so you don't have to face how much time, energy, or love you've already invested. Maybe letting go of that imagined future would feel like losing everything. Whatever the reason, it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to you. Jung observed that people who had truly developed psychologically learned to see others clearly, not without compassion, not without hope, but without distortion. They could observe behavior, take it seriously, and make decisions based on what was actually present. Not on promises, not on potential, not on what might happen someday, but on what is happening now. And this doesn't mean people can't change. They absolutely can. But they change on their own timeline, for their own reasons, when they are ready. You cannot will someone into transformation, and releasing that illusion requires grief. Real grief. Because you are not just letting go of a relationship. You are letting go of a version of that person that never truly existed. A version you may have loved for years. A version that lived in your hope, in your imagination, in your future plans. Jung insisted that this grief is necessary. You cannot bypass it. You have to feel it fully before you can see clearly. And once you do, something shifts. You stop asking, who could they become? And you start asking, who are they right now? And from there, a much more honest question emerges. Does this person, as they are today, belong in my life? That question changes everything, because now your decisions are grounded in reality, not fantasy. You'll know you've released this pattern when you can watch someone show you exactly who they are, and believe them. When you no longer overlay hope onto every interaction. When you no longer confuse potential with presence. That is clarity. And clarity is one of the most liberating states you can experience. The fifth and final pattern Jung spoke about is the most sensitive, and often the hardest to release. It is the identity of being wounded. Now, this must be approached with care. Because pain is real. Trauma is real. What you've been through matters. Acknowledging it, feeling it, understanding how it shaped you. These are all essential parts of healing. Jung never denied that, but he did ask a difficult question. What happens when the wound becomes your identity? When your story becomes centered around what was done to you? When your past becomes the primary lens through which you see yourself, others, and the world? Because at that point, something subtle begins to happen. You are no longer just someone who experienced pain. You become someone defined by it. Jung noticed that many people, even after years of self-reflection or therapy, remained psychologically anchored to their wounds. They could explain their trauma in great detail, but they were still living through it. They made decisions through it. They interpreted others through it. They saw themselves through it. And in doing so, they remained bound to it. Jung described this as a form of victim consciousness, not as blame, but as an orientation, a way of being that says, what happened to me determines what is possible for me. And here is where it becomes even more complex. Because there are benefits to holding on to this identity. People may treat you more gently. Your struggles feel justified. You belong to a certain narrative, a certain community. You have an explanation for why things are difficult. And perhaps most importantly, you don't have to take full responsibility for who you are becoming. None of this is intentional. None of it is malicious. It is human. But it keeps you stuck. Releasing the wounded identity does not mean denying your past. It does not mean minimizing your pain. It does not mean pretending you are unaffected. It means integrating what happened without being defined by it. It means carrying your experiences without organizing your entire life around them. It means shifting the question from, why am I like this because of what happened, to something far more powerful. Who am I becoming through it? That shift, from past to present, from injury to authorship, is one of the most profound transformations a person can make. Because now, your life is no longer dictated by what was done to you. It is shaped by what you choose to do next. You'll know you've released this identity when your past is no longer the first thing you share with someone new. When your story includes your wounds, but is not centered on them. When your pain is part of you, but not the definition of you. That is integration, and it is powerful. If you look closely, all 5 of these patterns share something in common. They are identities, versions of yourself that were built, often for very real, very valid reasons. The good person, the helper, the one who needs to be understood, the one who sees potential, the one who was wounded. Each one made sense at some point, but now they have become weight. And Jung's insight was clear. Transformation is not about adding more on top of these patterns. It is about letting them go. Completely. And yes, that feels like loss. Because in a way it is. Parts of you that existed for years, sometimes decades, begin to dissolve. There is a period where the old self is gone, and the new one hasn't fully formed. Jung called this space the void. And he emphasized it is not a mistake. It is not something to avoid. It is the place where real transformation happens. Not in comfort, not in certainty, but in the quiet, uncertain space between who you were and who you are becoming. And what emerges on the other side is not perfection. It is something far more real. A person who acts from authenticity instead of approval, who gives from fullness instead of need, who trusts themselves without constant validation, who sees clearly, chooses clearly, and lives without illusion. That is what raising your consciousness actually looks like. Not performance, not decoration, but the quiet, honest work of letting go. And in that letting go, discovering who you truly are.